You're fired.
I have always remembered True Lies as a breezy action comedy from the 90s. Arnold blowing everything to pieces. Jamie Lee Curtis, both graceful and alluring. A Harrier jet hovering above the city. A marriage on the verge of collapse, stitched back together with gunfire and tango. A movie you watch for fun, to escape reality, and to believe that in the end everything will be okay. But the truth is, True Lies was never a safe movie. Behind that humorous surface was a project worth more than $100 million, the biggest gamble in Hollywood at the time. A production that used real military aircraft, real explosives, and real moments that threatened lives. And a lead actress who had to fight to reclaim control of her own body during the film's most sensitive striptease scene. Below are 15 behind-the-scenes facts that show True Lies was far more complicated and dangerous than what we ever saw on screen. 15. True Lies was a remake, yet American audiences were almost never told. I can still clearly remember the first time I watched True Lies. Back then, it had exactly the shape of a premium Hollywood movie. Fast pace, steady laughs, and an Arnold Schwarzenegger who seemed born to live inside frames filled with explosions. There was no sense that this was a film borrowed from somewhere else. No hint of a work that came second. Everything felt completely original. But the truth is, True Lies didn't begin in Hollywood. It began with a 1991 French film called La Totale. The plots of the two films are nearly identical. A seemingly ordinary husband who is secretly a spy. A wife kept in the dark about his real life. A subplot in which the wife meets a man claiming to be an agent who is actually just a car salesman. And in both versions, the wife eventually steps into the world of espionage, joining her husband to confront that imposter. The difference wasn't in structure, but in scale. La Totale was a light comedy focused on the irony of marriage and identity. True Lies took that same framework and pumped it full of bombs, helicopters, international terrorism, and an American city on the brink of annihilation. Miami instead of a soccer stadium, Hollywood instead of French satire. What's striking is that True Lies never hid its remake status in the credits. Yet James Cameron almost never mentioned La Totale. In interviews, not out of shame, but because he understood the mindset of American audiences at the time. They wanted to feel they were watching a big original idea, not an adaptation. And perhaps that was True Lies' first lie. It dressed an old story in blockbuster clothing and let viewers believe they were seeing something entirely new, a very Hollywood lie, and a very effective one. 14. Real fighter jets. When True Lies brought real warfare to the screen, there's one detail I only truly noticed years later while rewatching True Lies: the weight of the scenes with aircraft. Not the weight of visual effects, but the weight of physical presence. They don't glide through the frame like CGI, they occupy real space and carry real mass. The reason is simple: they were real planes. During production, the crew used 3 actual US military fighter jets. Not models, not replicas. Genuine military assets, rented at around $100,000, with operating costs of roughly $2,400 per hour. The very fact that this deal was signed shows the scale and audacity of the project. This wasn't just filmmaking. It was placing real instruments of war inside an entertainment movie. What's fascinating is that one of those jets even became the star of a behind-the-scenes documentary hosted by Jamie Lee Curtis. And the very first thing she says to the camera isn't about acting at all. This is a real military aircraft. It sounds like a casual remark, yet it reveals a great deal about the film's mindset. At that time, Hollywood still believed in the power of practical reality. And True Lies became one of the last films of that era, when spectacle didn't come from computers but from putting audiences face to face with machines capable of killing in real life. 13. The striptease scene, when control became the most seductive thing. Do you still remember that scene? The one that made audiences laugh, cringe, and feel unsure how they were supposed to react. Helen Tasker's striptease in the fake interrogation room. On screen, it's staged as awkward comedy. But that discomfort is real, because at its core, this is a moment where a woman is forced into a power game she doesn't fully understand. For Jamie Lee Curtis, this wasn't a sexy for fun moment.
Compare work because there are always different people that you're playing.
It was the most ethically difficult scene in the entire film, not because of nudity, but because the character is stripped of control. And that's why Curtis did something unusual for the time. She personally chose and prepared the lingerie for the scene. That choice changed the way the moment feels. The outfit isn't perfect. It doesn't carry polished Hollywood glamour. It's slightly clumsy, slightly offbeat, just like Helen Tasker, an ordinary woman pushed into a role she was never ready for. The sensuality of the scene doesn't come from undressing, but from psychological tension, from a woman who is both being controlled and trying to reclaim the only autonomy she has left, how she presents herself to another's gaze. And so, in a film filled with gunfire, helicopters, and Harrier jets, the most controversial scene contains no explosions at all. Just a closed room, a chair, and a deeply human moment where Helen Tasker begins to take back ownership of herself through a small but lasting choice. 12. Arnold Schwarzenegger's near-death experience. As a kid, I always thought Arnold Schwarzenegger was the kind of man who couldn't die. On screen, he jumps out of planes, faces terrorists, pilots Harrier jets as if he were born for it. True Lies only strengthened that illusion, Arnold as the embodiment of invincibility. But in real life, one frightened horse was almost enough to shatter that myth. In a chase scene that looked purely cinematic, Arnold had to ride a horse in pursuit of the villain. Everything went smoothly until one of the cameras startled the animal. It reared up right on the edge of a building roughly 90 feet high. There was no editing, no CGI. Just a moment where, if Arnold had been a fraction slower, he would have plunged straight down. Instinct saved him. He leapt off the horse just before disaster struck. 1 second later, and True Lies might have become a film with a completely different meaning, or never finished at all. Looking back, there's a clear paradox. True Lies is a movie about carefully crafted deceptions. Yet its most dangerous moments were entirely honest. They were real. And the price of that reality almost turned out to be the life of the film's biggest star. 11. A budget of over $100 million when True Lies broke a Hollywood boundary. There's a very specific feeling when you watch True Lies today. It looks expensive in a way modern films rarely do. Not because of flashy visual effects, but because everything feels like it was paid for with real money. And that's because it was. True Lies carried a budget of roughly $100 to $120 million, making it the first film in Hollywood history to cross the $100 million mark. In the early 1990s, that number wasn't just big, it was borderline insane. At the time, Hollywood still treated $100 million as a psychological line. Crossing it meant accepting enormous risk. But James Cameron was never the kind of filmmaker who stopped at lines. True Lies was even entered into the Guinness Book of Records for its unprecedented budget. Ironically, that record didn't last long. Just a few years later, Cameron broke it himself with Titanic, whose budget reached around $200 million. Looking back, True Lies feels like a dangerous launching ramp. It proved that Hollywood could spend over $100 million on a film that wasn't based on an existing franchise, wasn't a sequel, and wasn't pure sci-fi, just faith placed in a director and a movie star. 10. The Ice Cube Tray. When real-life tragedy became a throwaway joke. There are lines we hear and laugh at, never knowing that behind them lies a broken marriage. In True Lies, there's a tiny moment when Harry tells Gib that Helen might be having an affair. Gib recounts the story of his second wife. She took everything when she left him.
What kind of a sick bitch takes the ice cube trays out of the freezer?
It sounds hilarious, but it wasn't fiction. The line directly references the very real divorce of Tom Arnold and Roseanne Barr, which happened while the film was being shot. At the time, people in the entertainment industry whispered that Roseanne had taken almost everything. And yes, even the ice cube tray was gone. Tom Arnold told the story on set. Arnold Schwarzenegger heard it, burst out laughing, and exclaimed, "What kind of sick woman takes the ice cube tray from the freezer?" James Cameron overheard and immediately recognized script gold. He put the story straight into the movie, almost unchanged. That moment reveals something fascinating about True Lies. The film wasn't built only from massive action set pieces, but also from very real fragments of the actors' lives. Personal tragedy was transformed into humour, not to mock it, but simply to survive it. 9. Arnold Schwarzenegger's greatest challenge was tango. When we think of Arnold Schwarzenegger, we think of muscles, guns, and action sequences that usually require stunt doubles. So when I first watched True Lies, I completely overlooked one small detail, the tango. Only years later, watching more carefully, did I realise something was unusual about that scene. Arnold isn't pretending to dance. He isn't hiding behind editing tricks. There's a serious concentration in every step, as if he's trying to prove something. The truth is, Arnold's greatest challenge in True Lies wasn't the stunts, it was learning to dance tango properly. He understood that this scene couldn't be faked. Tango isn't just movement, it's body language. And if it's fake, the audience will immediately know. Arnold trained for about 6 months for this scene. 6 months for a sequence that lasts only a few minutes. The reason was simple. He wanted the tango to be convincing enough not to fall short of what audiences had seen just a few years earlier in Scent of a Woman, with Al Pacino. Both films used the same piece of music, Por una cabeza. And Arnold knew it. He knew audiences would compare the two, even subconsciously. There's a beautiful irony here. Arnold, the symbol of brute strength, was forced to face a challenge that demanded softness. In True Lies, the tango isn't just a romantic moment. It's the moment Harry Tasker must step away from controlling everything through force and learn to communicate through rhythm and trust. 8. Digital domain takes flight. When Cameron laid the first brick of a new era, would you agree that the film's visual effects don't try to wow you in an obvious way? They simply fit. Nothing showy, but everything works seamlessly in service of the story. I later learned why. True Lies was the starting point of a visual effects empire. Before that, On the Abyss and Terminator 2, James Cameron had worked with industrial light and magic. But in 1993, he made a bold move, co-founding his own VFX company, Digital Domain. True Lies was the first film to feature Digital Domain's visual effects, and while it isn't remembered as a VFX breakthrough, it clearly revealed a different ambition. Effects didn't need to draw attention, only to be believable. From that foundation, Digital Domain went on to do effects for Apollo 13, The Fifth Element, Titanic, The Lord of the Rings trilogy, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, I, Robot, Avatar, countless Marvel and DC films, and more recently Sonic. After 5 Academy Awards, Digital Domain became one of the pillars of modern visual effects. But what's remarkable is that it all began with a film that never tried to shock audiences with technology. True Lies didn't show off its tools, it used them to make audiences believe, and that became the philosophy Cameron and Digital Domain carried forward for decades. 7. Tom Arnold, the role that almost didn't exist because of his real-life reputation. In most viewers' memories, Gibb feels so natural that it seems like the character was always meant to be there. Only much later did I learn that Tom Arnold entered the film almost by accident. In fact, Tom didn't come to the audition to win a role. He simply wanted to meet the director. At the time, just standing in front of James Cameron was already a rare opportunity. Tom read a few scenes opposite Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Cameron immediately noticed their strange chemistry. A stoic wall of muscle paired with a fast-talking, very human motor mouth. During the audition, Tom cracked a joke. "Arnold doesn't look that big. I think I could take him." Cameron laughed, and sometimes one perfectly timed moment is enough to change everything. But the celebration didn't last. 20th Century Fox strongly objected. Cameron didn't yet know that Tom's public image was in terrible shape, largely due to highly publicised personal scandals involving his wife at the time, Roseanne Barr. To Fox, Tom Arnold was a PR risk, not an asset. Cameron refused to back down. He bluntly stated that if Tom wasn't cast, he would take the film to another studio. It wasn't an empty threat. And Fox gave in. Interestingly, Tom only learned about this after the film was finished. When he heard the story, he was deeply grateful to Cameron, the man who saw potential rather than scandal. From that point on, Tom became close friends with both Arnold and Cameron. 6. When the composer of The Terminator returned. There are film scores we remember because they roar loudly. And there are scores we remember because they slip quietly into our emotions without forcing themselves. The music of True Lies belongs to the second kind. The first time I watched the film, I never once thought about who wrote the music. Everything just felt right. It wasn't until I learned that the score was composed by Brad Fiedel, the man behind The Terminator, that I began listening with different ears. Fiedel had created a cold, mechanical soundscape for The Terminator. But in True Lies, he shows clear artistic growth. The music here is flexible, grand when the story turns epic, stealthy when it leans into espionage, and lightly playful during comedic moments. This is no longer the music of inevitable doom. It's the music of a world where action and comedy must coexist. Sadly, after True Lies, Brad Fiedel only worked on a handful of film projects, including Johnny Mnemonic, before largely stepping away from the Hollywood spotlight. 5. I hated every minute of it. A joke and a real-life marriage. Some behind-the-scenes stories sound funny at first, but when you think about them more carefully, they reveal far more than expected. In one interview, Arnold Schwarzenegger was asked whether his wife was upset watching him sit through Jamie Lee Curtis's striptease scene in True Lies. Arnold answered immediately, "She did ask, and I told her, honey, I hated every single minute of it." Audiences laughed. The press quoted it. A very Arnold response. But in the context of the film, the line carries another layer of meaning. True Lies revolves around suspicion within a marriage. Harry Tasker lies to his wife. Helen doubts her husband, and both are forced to see each other through a different lens. Arnold, in real life, understood that feeling well. He wasn't just an action star. He was a husband living in a world where the line between work and private life is easily scrutinized. That joke was, in truth, a form of reassurance, a way of asserting that what happens on screen does not get carried home. What's interesting is that while audiences view the striptease as a seductive moment, for Arnold, at least by his own account, it was simply a professional obligation, even an uncomfortable one. A very True Lies reversal. What delights the audience is precisely what leaves the character, and perhaps the actor, uneasy. 4. The name above the title. When Arnold Schwarzenegger shared the ultimate position of power. In Hollywood, there is one thing whose value borders on power itself, above the title billing. It isn't just prestige, it's money, it's status, it's leverage. According to the original contract for True Lies, Arnold Schwarzenegger's name was to appear at both the beginning and end of the film, alone above the title. Only after that would come the line, "with Jamie Lee Curtis," a familiar structure. But once James Cameron finished assembling the film, he realised something crucial. True Lies wasn't just an action movie, it was a family story. A film about marriage, and Helen Tasker was its emotional centre. Cameron called Arnold and made a significant request: to place Jamie Lee Curtis's name alongside Arnold's, equally above the title. According to Curtis, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. A silence that carries real weight in Hollywood. Then Arnold agreed. He added that the film could not be what it was without her. For Jamie Lee Curtis, this was a special moment. In an industry where above-the-title billing is a rare and expensive commodity, a superstar like Arnold voluntarily sharing that position was an uncommon act of generosity. 3. The True Lies video game, a simple gaming memory of another era. I don't remember exactly when I first played the True Lies video game. I only remember a very ordinary afternoon. A CRT television, a slightly stiff SNES controller, and the simple joy of controlling Arnold Schwarzenegger. In the mid-1990s, nearly every action movie had a tie-in game. Most were made just for the sake of it. But True Lies was different, at least in my memory. Released on SNES and Sega Genesis, it was a top-down shooter. Not flashy, not ambitious, but incredibly satisfying. The movement was smooth, the shooting felt sharp, the level design was clear, the graphics were colourful rather than dark, and the wide range of weapons gave each stage its own rhythm. And then there was the jet sequence. That was the moment when the game went beyond being just a tie-in. When the Harrier appeared, the camera angle shifted. Enemies flooded the screen and you began raining fire on everything below. It genuinely made me feel like I was playing True Lies, not just some generic shooter. 2. True Lies was never a failure. It just wasn't loud like its siblings. There's a common perception that True Lies is the less talked about James Cameron film. A project wedged between Terminator and Titanic. A brief stopover. But the numbers tell a completely different story. True Lies grossed around $378 million worldwide. It was the third highest grossing film of 1994, behind only Forrest Gump and The Lion King. At one point, it even knocked Forrest Gump out of the #1 box office spot. It was also the highest grossing R-rated film of that year. No small achievement. So why does True Lies feel overshadowed? Perhaps because it lacks an easily summarized big idea. Terminator is a robot from the future. Titanic is a doomed ship. Avatar is an alien world. And True Lies, a husband lying to his wife. A premise that's intimate, ordinary, and not easily turned into myth. The sequel once existed and disappeared because the world changed. Some films don't get sequels because they fail. True Lies was the opposite. A sequel was once seriously planned. Around 1997, True Lies 2 entered development. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jamie Lee Curtis, Tom Arnold, and Bill Paxton were all expected to return. A script had been written, everything was moving forward. Then 2001 happened. After the real-world terrorist attacks, James Cameron made a firm decision not to make the sequel. He believed terrorism was no longer appropriate material for entertainment. What had once been escapist action had become painfully real. The project was cancelled. In the years that followed, rumours surfaced from time to time. A television series in 2010, a Disney Plus project mentioned in 2019, but none of them went anywhere. And perhaps that's fitting. True Lies feels like a snapshot of a bygone Hollywood era, when directors were allowed to take risks, when actors did things that would no longer be permitted today, and when audiences could laugh at terrorism without feeling weighed down by reality. That may be why the film never got a sequel. Not because it wasn't good enough, but because it belonged to its moment. And sometimes, the best way to keep a film alive is not to pull it out of the memory where it once shined. Which line from True Lies left the strongest impression on you? Leave a comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep exploring the hidden stories behind the golden age of cinema.